Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. I got a great episode lined up for you today. But before I get to that, I just briefly, for a minute or two, want to talk about another book coming out that's detailing what was going on in the Biden White House and how bad the president's cognitive and physical decline really was. And the real story is the conspiracy and cover-up. And now the same frauds that engaged in that conspiracy and cover-up are now looking to make money off of it. Even though they deceived the American people, they manipulated the political system. You have the latest book coming out with Jake Tapper. He's an anchor on CNN. And he's saying, well, he didn't realize the extent of it, that maybe he should have covered it more and sought to dig into the details a little bit more. But he's a fraud. He knew exactly what was going on. Listen, the reality is every single one of you that listened to this program, I outlined President Biden's cognitive decline. You saw it in 2020 when he was running for office. It was clear as day. And when you had him shaking hands with ghosts or the Easter Bunny had to escort him, it should have been clear to every single person. What really burns me up about these Democrat insiders, they all knew. They all knew. And you have people like Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd coming out saying that they were misled, they were deceived. They weren't. Understand, journalists have much more information than we do. They speak to the people inside the Beltway, okay? And they know exactly what was going on. As a matter of fact, in 2022, as Chuck Todd stated, after Biden's disastrous debate performance in 2024, Chuck Todd stated that in 2022, a cabinet official, a cabinet secretary came to him and said there's no possible way Biden could run for a second term. He's shot. And Chuck Todd chose to keep that information to himself until it was okay to talk about Biden's cognitive decline out loud. And every single cabinet secretary in President Biden's administration should be disqualified in the future from ever holding office again because they knowingly lied and deceived the American public. It's completely ridiculous that these people stand to make huge gains even though they were all involved in this conspiracy to lie to the American people. So now that I got that off my chest, today I want to dive into President Trump's recent visit, his diplomatic mission to the Middle East. It was an ambitious and potentially game-changing trip. And when we examine the Middle East, this trip was intended to reshape not just the Middle Eastern region, but the global balance of power on the international world stage. Biden completely disengaged from the Middle East. He completely alienated allies, and I put the allies in quotes because, let's be honest here, there are a lot of questions that still remain. But when it came to the Biden administration, he wasn't able to flex America's muscles. In fact, he pushed countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, closer to China's sphere of influence as opposed to ours. And so now you have President Trump that's looking to change things. He's looking to reestablish America on the world stage. But the visit does raise some fundamental questions that we have to ask. First, is this a tactic by Trump to box in Iran once and for all? To finally push Iran to either force him to an agreement or the mullah's days are coming to an end. Another question, is this a strategic play to reassert our dominance and halt the spread that the Chinese have been able to gain within the region? Chinese money, very influential. Chinese businesses, very influential in this region. So is this a way that Trump's going to try and push China out the door? We see Russia's interest getting challenged, particularly when it comes to Syria. That was Russia's one and only real stronghold where they had an actual presence in the Middle East. Well, now that you have a new leader in Syria, is this going to change that dynamic? But I think most importantly, we have to ask, is the Middle East ready to move past the toxic ideology of radical Islam? Is it ready to start normalizing relations with other countries and call out terrorism and make sure that terrorism doesn't fester in this region? I mean, listen, we can't play games here. Okay, the reality, if we go back to the 1950s, you had a decent-sized Christian and Jewish population in the Middle East, and that's all been gone. It's all but gone because the radical Islamists have basically either killed them or booted them out, forced them to leave. So now Trump is taking a very different approach to the Middle East. And while the Biden administration watched our influence slip away, watch countries drift toward China and Russia, Trump is making it clear America is back on the world stage. It's time to invest in peace, not war. And more importantly, you're seeing a new American foreign policy. You're seeing the Trump Doctrine be laid out. The Trump Doctrine, which states, invest in America, do business with America, and we could grow together. We're not going to dictate to you about your internal domestic squabbles. We're not going to preach to you and lecture you. We're certainly not going to do any endless wars or irresponsible regime changes. And so you see a new foreign policy taking shape that deviates really from 30, 40, 50 years, if not longer, of American foreign policy. And that's going to be the focus of this episode today. So you're not going to want to miss a beat. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. So the Trump visit to the Middle East has the potential to be a game changer. The Middle East is rapidly transforming before our eyes. And this visit is designed partially to put a full-scale strategic containment of Iran in place. I mean, Trump isn't playing footsie with Tehran anymore. The goal is maximum pressure. Will it work? That's the question. You know, Iran is no longer the powerhouse it once tried to be. It lost enormous power over the course of the last couple of years. And from 2003 up until about 2017, 18, and 19, Iran was causing a lot of chaos in the Middle East. You had the Shia Crescent there. You had more soldiers getting killed by Iranian IEDs than soldiers being killed by al-Qaeda, that's for sure. And when you look at the Bush administration and the Obama administration, they never really punished Iran the way Iran should have been punished for that. I mean, how many of our soldiers came home in flag-draped coffins because of the Revolutionary Guard? How many of our soldiers came home with life-altering injuries because of these Iranian-made IEDs and the unrest that Iran was fomenting in Iraq? So really, when you look at what the Bush administration and the Obama administration did, is they allowed Iran to build up. They allowed Iran to get stronger within the Middle East, to create this proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And then Trump comes into office. And it was really interesting because Iran tried to flex their muscle with Trump. It shot down $1 billion drone. It continued forward with its nuclear program. It launched missiles into Saudi Arabia. And Trump didn't do anything. But Trump said one thing. He said, if you touch the hair on one American, whether it's a soldier, a contractor, doesn't matter. You touch the hair on one American, you're going to pay the price. And what happened? Well, an American contractor got killed, several others got injured, and what did Trump do? He did something that the two previous administrations wouldn't have dared to do. He took out Qasem Soleimani, the second most powerful person in Iran. The Bush administration contemplated it, but they said that would get us into a conflict with Iran. And we couldn't afford another war at that time, which is not wrong. I mean, we were struggling, strapping ourselves thin, being in Afghanistan and Iraq at the same time. The Obama administration virtually ignored it, all because they wanted to get the nuclear deal. That wasn't really a nuclear deal. It wouldn't have stopped or prevented Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And then Trump comes in and he just says, you harmed an American, you're going to pay the price. And they did. And then Trump lost in 2020, and so Biden comes into office, and what does Biden do? Well, he immediately lifts the sanctions that Trump put on that made Iran broke. He empowered Iran, he enriched Iran. Well, now there's a new sheriff in town, and Iran is no longer that powerhouse. First of all, sanctions are back on. Now nuclear negotiations have started between the Trump administration and Iran. We spoke about that a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. But if we look at what happened to Iranians' influence, it's all been decimated. You had Israel taking out Iranian proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas. You had Israel conduct airstrikes within Iran, taking out its air defense systems, its radar systems, causing immense damage. You had Israel assassinating Hamas figures inside Iran. And then when it comes to Syria, what happened? Well, Assad was ousted from power. Assad couldn't hang on, and now Iran's influence in Syria is virtually gone. So without Syria, the Shia Crescent is now broken. It does not exist anymore. That crescent, stretching from Iran to Lebanon, was the backbone of the regional aspirations, and that has ended. So Iran is boxed into a corner. Syria is no longer their playground. And another adversary of the United States, Russia, was also a key Iranian partner. It's losing its grip too. It's bogged down in Ukraine. It's stretched in. You have Middle Eastern nations that are now gravitating back towards our sphere of influence. And they understand. I mean, let's be honest here. Who do you trust more as a partner? Moscow, Beijing, or the United States? And it's not to say that we should be trusted because we've screwed things up. I still can't believe that you have the Pakistani doctor that got us Osama bin Laden. He's still in a Pakistani prison. It's disgraceful to me. And President Trump should be pushing for his release. But the United States has reestablished itself in the Middle East, but not through regime change, not through war. And we're doing it, and we're blunting Chinese power. Under Biden, we watched our allies lean into Beijing. Trump is flipping that script, saying no more. And one of his boldest moves was the announcement that he's rescinding the Biden administration's AI diffusion rule, which restricted our semiconductors to be exported to countries like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, countries like India. Trump sent a message loud and clear that America is open for business. You don't want Chinese semiconductors. You'd much rather American semiconductors. And how did the region respond? How did countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates respond? Well, they responded with a jaw-dropping $1.4 trillion commitment. $1.4 trillion was announced in 1 week that these countries are going to invest in American companies. They're going to buy products from Boeing, Amazon, NVIDIA, and so many others. That's not just about economics. That's a realignment right there. And the bottom line is that we are finally using America's hard and soft power. We're repositioning America as the indispensable nation. Will it pay dividends? I believe it will. And the trip wasn't just about alliances and investments. It was also forcing a long overdue conversation about the ideology that has festered in the Middle East, the history of the Middle East and the wars. Understand, this is the most conflicted region on the face of the earth. Time and time again, we've seen violence upon violence upon violence. And we have to confront that. We have to talk about that. And I want to talk about Saudi Arabia. I want to talk about radical Islam. And I'm going to explain some uncomfortable truths that we need to expose. Because we have to be really careful. While there is a sense of optimism that things may be changing in the Middle East, we also have to remain skeptical. Now, we've been talking about Trump's visit to the Middle East, how it is profound, how it's not only reshaping the Middle East, but it's also going to reshape the world stage, that America is going to make a strategic play that, hey, we're still in a unipolar world. America is still the dominant power. America has hard and soft power that no other nation can match. And so we're going to exert our influence. However, when it comes to the Middle East, there's always been a shadow hanging over our relationship with Saudi Arabia, and we can't run from it. We got to confront it head on, and that's 9/11. Because we can't pretend that 9/11 didn't happen. 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals. And to this day, our government still has classified documents that remain sealed. And it may implicate certain Saudi officials. Now, why? Why are these documents still classified? Why haven't these documents been released to the American public, especially the 9/11 families who suffered so much? Why is that the case? You know, the American people, we can handle the truth. We can take it. And if elements within the Saudi government were involved, we need to know about that. And, when we look at the Saudi royal family, understand there's over 1,000 members of the Saudi royal family. It doesn't mean that a crown prince or the king of Saudi Arabia authorized these attacks. You could have had some of them going rogue. But we need to know, were Saudi officials implicated in this? And if so, what did the Saudi Arabian government do to those that were implicated? Because I can't imagine that we wouldn't let the Saudi Arabian government know that, hey, we have these high-level people in your country that contributed to the 9/11 attacks, and Saudi Arabia doesn't do anything about it. At least they better have done something about it. And we know Saudi Arabia, it's well known. They are a brutal state with a brutal internal justice system. And it wouldn't be a stretch to think that if Saudi officials were implicated in 9/11, that the Saudi Arabian government itself, the crown prince, the kings, found out, and those responsible were quietly dealt with. They were handled. They disappeared. But that's just speculation. We need facts because facts matter. And the fact that this information is still hidden from the American populace is disgraceful. And I look at Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. I'm not going to sit there and blame him for 9/11. Where was he? A child when 9/11 happened? Obviously, he had no implication in it, but he also needs to know. Okay, so we all need to put sunlight on this. We need to put this to rest once and for all if we're going to rebuild this relationship with Saudi Arabia. If we're going to look forward, and we're going to partner up with these countries, well, we need to make sure that the radical ideology, radical Islam, is something that these governments take seriously. And I said it back in 2017. When we look at Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and I'm not saying he's a great person. I mean, he is a brutal leader. Understand, this is how they rule in the Middle East, and this is the real world. But when we look at Mohammed bin Salman, he is someone that did more to combat radical Islam than anyone else in this region. When he gave that speech in 2017 or 2018, and he said, we're not going to fund the Wahhabi sect of Islam anymore. We're going to cut funding to the madrasas. These are people that speak, they're a monarchy, the divine right of kings. They view their bloodline is directly from their prophet Muhammad, and therefore when the crown prince speaks, people are going to listen. And if you defy what the crown prince says, we know there are brutal consequences for that. And so he came out and he pushed back hard against radical Islam. So we're seeing a change. But again, we need the truth. We need to understand how deep does this go. And I'm going to get into Qatar in a minute. But Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations, it's clear that they're embarking on an aggressive modernization program in their own countries. They want to present themselves as hubs for businesses, tourism, and technology. And that's great, but it's not enough. We need the complete and full rejection of radical Islam. Modernizing skylines doesn't automatically modernize ideology, especially when I look to Syria and I see the new leader is a former member of Al-Qaeda and a former member of ISIS. Think about that a second. Is this region really turning the page on radical Islam? Or is it just giving it a new cover? And we need answers to that. When we look at the Syrian leader, President Trump announced that he is lifting all the sanctions on Syria to give it a chance. He's going to give this leader a shot. And fine, I understand that. I get that. And the reason Trump is doing that, obviously, is because of Iran. But at the same time, we better watch him closely. And the second that he deviates, the second he starts pushing anti-Americanism, we need to return those sanctions right back on Syria extraordinarily quickly. Because we have to stop with that we're not going to hold these governments accountable. And it's not that we're just going to get involved and get into endless wars. And then there's Qatar. You know, Trump has reportedly been offered a private jet by the Qatari government. My advice to the Trump administration, don't accept it. Don't accept it for two reasons. First of all, we're going to have to strip that plane to its nuts in order to make sure that there's no sabotage or no listening devices. To me, our leaders should not be traveling around in Qatari jets, even if it is a gift. I don't care. But Qatar also has deep and documented ties to terror networks. And again, we can't just look the other way. It's amazing how they have all these connections where they're involved in all the talks, Hamas, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, you name it, and someone in the Qatari government knows someone from these organizations. Okay, again, I think that it's important that you have countries that do act in a way of neutrality to try and negotiate things, but I just find it really strange that if there is an Islamic terrorist organization, you could bet a Qatari official knows someone within that organization. So you have that, and that's why I say that we have to be careful with accepting these jets from Qatar because it's a national security risk. Is there surveillance equipment on this plane? And nothing in life is for free. Nothing. There's always strings attached. Trump doesn't need their gifts. The United States doesn't need their gifts. What we need from them is cooperation. That's what we need from them. What we need from them is a zero-tolerance policy towards Islamic extremism. What we need from them is economic agreements that are going to box out China from the Middle East. And that's what I feel is the most important. So that's going to bring us to the big picture. What's the real goal here? What is the end game? You know, when we look at Trump's visit to the Middle East, I think what's happened is actually a really big deal. This will go down in the history books depending on what the end result is. And it's a realignment. It's reshaping not just the Middle East, but the global world stage. What I find amazing is that President Trump is doing what the political class said was impossible. He's pushing for peace in this region without appeasement. He's not going for regime change. He's not nation building. He's not providing billions upon billions, trillions of dollars in new roads, new airports for these countries. He's saying, here's the deal. Work with America. Invest in America and you'll prosper. But if you keep backing terrorists, if you back the chaos, if you want to go to China's sphere of influence, go ahead. It's not going to work out well. You're going to be isolated from the United States. And I think that's the Trump doctrine in the nutshell. It's about strength, not submission. Diplomacy is what's necessary, not lectures, not the tired and sad virtue signaling that we've seen throughout the years here in the United States. We have to have partnerships with these nations. And it's about peace. Americans are tired of endless wars that have actually not gone our way and have made things more difficult, that have actually made things worse. We can honestly say that. And you still have the neocons here in the United States that are upset. They're upset that President Trump is showing leadership on the world stage. See, they would much rather the puppet in Joe Biden where they could pull all the strings. Think about how many of these people are itching for more wars. They want to go to war with Iran. They want to go to war with Russia. They'll take us into a war with anyone on this planet. The only time you actually go to war is in defense of a nation, when there is no other options, when it's a war of last resort, when it's a war that you have to fight to win. Unfortunately, the neocons, and apparently the whole Democratic Party now, loves getting involved in nations, toppling governments, putting in puppet regimes that don't work out, and then it just creates chaos. So one of the big takeaways from this trip is the potential to possibly expand the Abraham Accords. And if Trump could bring more nations into this coalition, especially Saudi Arabia, that's going to be a historic breakthrough. The Abraham Accords themselves, when Trump first did it in his first administration, was worthy of a Peace Prize. You had Jimmy Carter getting a Peace Prize for the Camp David Accords. You had, I believe, even Bill Clinton. If he didn't get one, he was certainly being considered for one when he was trying to negotiate between Yasser Arafat and the Israeli state. Then you had Obama, who got a Nobel Peace Prize for absolutely nothing. Well, in his first term, he should have gotten one for what he did with the Abraham Accords, getting Arab countries and African countries to recognize Israel's right to exist, to start diplomatic talks, diplomatic exchanges between these nations was huge. And if he could get Saudi Arabia on board, that's a game changer. That's going to change the dynamics of the Middle East for an entire generation to come. But make no mistake about it, this isn't just about a kumbaya moment. This is a cold, calculated, strategic move by the president. This is where you see the president's skills and how it might just be working. It may just pay off because the old rules are gone. The old rules that have continued to fail, you know, the foreign policy elites that have been in charge and have made one bad decision after another bad decision time and time again, those rules are out the window. We've seen the results of them, and it's time to start something new. And the global order is shifting. And we have to make a determination. We're either going to stand down and ignore this shift and allow China to become the dominant country of the 21st century, or you're going to do what President Trump is doing, and he's going to put America at the center of it. That's what it comes down to. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, please leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating, take 30 seconds to write a good review, and share this episode. Share it with your family and friends, post it on social media, because let's face it, we don't sugarcoat anything. I remain a little bit optimistic when it comes to his Middle East travels and the successes he had on this trip, but I also remain skeptical knowing this region, knowing the ideology within this region, and so we're going to call it as we see it here at the P.A.S. Report. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.